Hello and welcome back to Bookish. I wanted to do a quick review of There There by Tommy Orange today. I read this book as a part of my People of Color Readathon and I wanted to share my thoughts with you about it. So Tommy Orange is a Native American writer. I believe the cover flap says that he is an enrolled member of the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes. He has been writing for a while. He's a graduate of a MFA in creative writing program, and this is his very first novel. This book was kind of around, I saw it around a lot on YouTube just a little bit while back, so a lot of other booktubers may have already kind of reviewed it, but I think the book is worth thinking about. I wanted to tell you, what I thought. So, to begin with, the story involves a large number of Native Americans living in Oakland, California in contemporary times. One of the things that Orange is trying to draw attention to in the book is the fact that not all Native Americans live a reservation life. That lots of Native Americans today live in the inner city, and they suffer from the same problems that exist in the inner city. For the most part, the plot of this book follows a diverse group of Native Americans from Oakland, California, whose lives are connected and intersected, sometimes through friendship relationships, sometimes through complicated familial relationships, who are all getting together for one event in Oakland, California called the Big Oakland Powwow. But to be honest with you, the plot of this book is not really the focus of this book. The focus of this book is about these Native Americans and what they suffer through and what they struggle through. And like many people who are caught in the inner cities in poverty, they are people affected by major social problems. So in this book we encounter people and families whose lives and families are being destroyed by drugs, by alcohol, by suicide, by violence, by poverty. These are families being held together by strong women, aunts and grandmothers, and mothers trying to hold their families together, and in the process attempting to hold the community together, and even, you might even go in a broader sense, Native Americans in general, or the Native American community in general together. I think There is a book with a social message. I don't think there's any doubt that that's part of what Tommy Orange is trying to convey here. He has a point to make. And in part that point is about the treatment of Native Americans by the United States of America in the past, going all the way back to colonial days, and continuing on today in the case of just continued neglect of our inner cities and of the problems facing groups like Native Americans in the United States of America. I think that's a part of the point of this book as well. And one of the strengths of the book is Orange's ability to kind of connect those things together. The past history of Native Americans in the United States and their dealings with the United States government, with the future issues facing Native Americans in the United States, and sometimes in their issues with the United States government. Like sad. So that's really one of the strengths. I think Orange does that very well. There are some interesting interludes and chapters and pieces of information which contain. Go on. There are chapters and interludes and pieces which contain some really insightful discussions about how Native Americans have been treated. And so I think that's a fairly well-handled part of the book. This is a book with a lot of characters. I didn't count, but I'm going to guess that there are 12 to 15 named characters in the book. And one of the strengths of the book is Orange's ability to bring all these stories together, to connect them in some way. It's a really ambitious, inventive novel with some very intricate storytelling at work, and I think that's to be commended. I'm not always sure that Orange pulls it off perfectly, but it is a really ambitious goal that he has for his book. There are some things about the book that keep it for me from being a great book. And one of those things I think is just one of those things we find common in the first novels by young writers, and that is almost the subconscious feeling I think they have, that they have to try to put everything in this one book. That, maybe it's almost like they think I'm not going to get another book, so I've got to get all my ideas, everything I know into this one book. At some points in there, it feels like that's what Tommy Orange is doing. All the plot ideas, all the characters, all the social issues he wanted to raise. He puts them in this novel, and that can make things feel a little bit strained. You kind of feel the presence of the author in that effort to get all that stuff in here. By the way, to kind of counteract that, one of the things I find most charming about the book is its very detailed description of the geography of Oakland, California. I think Orange's knowledge of Oakland might rival Joyce's knowledge of Dublin in terms of his ability to describe places and streets and train stations and public. Anyway, there's a whole lot of details in the book about Oakland, which I liked and I felt really grounded in the novel. But on the whole, from time to time, you can kind of feel him straining to get all of his ideas in there. In addition to that, writing a book with a social message is a delicate thing. It can be really easy to go just a little too far and be a little heavy-handed in your attempt to force readers into this realization of what this country has done to Native Americans and how that still has an impact on what this country is still doing. And there is one specific example of that. And in one section he's describing, or one of his characters is describing a dream he had. And that dream really is just a thinly veiled kind of allegory of the history of the United States, the people of the United States treatment of Native Americans from colonial times all the way through reservation times. And it's not that his ideas are wrong. It's not that message is not a message that needs to be repeated. But in a novel, what you hope, and what I think we have to hope, is that those things can be conveyed to the reader through the plot, through the storytelling, and not simply through giving this kind of historical lesson with a point. A lot of times Orange is able to pull it off, but every once in a while you see his social agenda peeking through, and the novel ceases to feel like a novel and starts to feel a little bit like a lesson that's being taught. And again, it's a lesson that should be taught, but in a novel maybe it should be taught more subtly. So those are my two biggest complaints about the novel. One of the things that I think is one of its strengths is in what I think is the strength of Orange's writing in general. He switches back and forth perspective from characters. Sometimes he's an omniscient third-person narrator. Sometimes he's the character themselves. Sometimes he's one character describing you get one character describing the events taking place with another, and I think he handles that. I think he handles that really well. And there's some really good writing. And as a matter of fact, there's occasionally some what I think of as fairly beautiful writing. And I wanted to give you an example of that by reading a passage, a fairly long passage from the book, which I think gives you an idea of Orange's ability to change the rhythm of his writing. And in a kind of really powerful way, by changing his rhythm, forcing the reader to change the rhythm of their reading and building intensity actually through the way in which he writes. So that's the passage. That's what I see in the passage I'm going to read you. So here we go. Before you were born, you were a head and a tail in a milky pool, a swimmer. You were a race, a dying off, a breaking through, an arrival. Before you were born, you were an egg in your mom, who was an egg in her mom. Before you were born, you were the nested Russian grandmother doll of possibility in your mom's ovaries. You are two halves of 1,000 different kinds of possibilities, 1,000,000 heads or tails, flip shine on a spun coin. Before you were born, you were the idea to make it to California for gold or bust. You were white, you were brown, you were red, you were dust. You were hiding, you were seeking. Before you were born, you were chased, beaten, broken, trapped on a reservation in Oklahoma. Before you were born, you were an idea your mom got into her head in the 70s to hitchhike across the country and become a dancer in New York. You were on your way when you did not make it across the country, but sputtered and spiraled and wound up in Taos, New Mexico, at a peyote commune named Morningstar. Before you were born, you were your dad's decision to move away from the reservation up to northern New Mexico to learn about a Pueblo guy's fireplace. You were the light in the wet of your parents' eyes as they met across that fireplace in ceremony. Before you were born, your halves inside them moved to Oakland. Before you were born, before your body was much more than heart, spine, bone, skin, blood, and vein, when you just started to build muscle with movement, before you showed bulge in your belly as her belly, before your dad's pride could belly swell from the side of you, your parents were in a room listening to the sound your heart made. I really think that's a fairly extraordinary passage that does all kinds of things that are beautiful, and I think Tommy Orange is capable of being a really important, successful writer. So my rating for There is that this is a good book. I don't think it's a great book. I think it suffers from some of the problems of a first novel. I think it suffers from some of the problems of heavy-handedness in terms of a novel with a social conscience, sometimes getting outside the structure of the novel and hearing the author's voice too clearly, or hearing the message too clearly and not very subtly. But I do think the book is full of inventive storytelling and writing and characterization, and it's full of all kinds of life and descriptions of tragedies, of everyday tragedies that take place, throughout the United States and in our inner cities and in our impoverished communities. And while I don't think this is a great book, I think that Tommy Orange has the ability and will probably produce a great book at some point. So I think you should read There. I think it's a good book. I think it's well worth reading, if for nothing else than to be at the beginning of what I think could be a very productive and successful writing career. So if you read There, let me know what you think about the book in the comments. If you'd like to talk about the review, please feel free to do that in the comments too. I'd love to have a discussion with you about that. Thank you for watching.